So, former Washington Governor Gary Locke, a Democrat, he had some harsh words on Thursday for his own party when he took part in a discussion on stage. He was up there along with Marty Brown, former OFM director. Both of them, served under Democratic administrations. Of course, Governor Gary Locke himself a Democrat, but Marty Brown served under both Locke's administration and under Gregoire's administration. And this was pretty interesting to hear Governor Locke be very critical of majority Democrats. Now, you may recall if you've lived in Washington any length of time, when Governor Locke's term, two terms, 1997 up through 2005, he then created what he called priorities of government. That was during 2002, his second term. So the POG, priorities of government, basically, he went back to agency heads and said, I want you to get very real about, how we can maybe streamline things. One agency and another state agency, might be replicating it. That maybe we can, cross promote and potentially lay off some folks in state agencies and really get a lot more serious about budget priorities. So he made that a real part of his administration, and it was successful. They were able to budget within means. So AWB's president on stage when Governor Locke was up there yesterday, he said, What advice might you have for current budget writers?" Majority Democrats, of course, in Olympia control both the House and the Senate by large majorities, and they really do completely control how those budgets end up being ultimately crafted. Republicans, try as they will, don't have a lot of control over what ultimately ends up getting passed. So, this was Chris Johnson, who is again the president for AWB, asking Governor Locke, how might you encourage current budget writers to embrace some of your POG approach? This was former Governor Locke's response on stage.
Quite frankly, I have great concerns about the budgeting process in Olympia right now, and it's happening throughout all local governments. Rachel talked about it. You cannot take one-time money and commit it to permanent programming, because when that one-time money goes away, how are you going to continue that program? And then you create all this dissatisfaction and disappointment among the interest groups. So do you then raise revenues, whether it's taxes or revenues? Are you going to be able to cut other programs? Also, if you borrow money, where will you find the money? If you borrow money to pay for a program, where will you find the money to replenish or repay that fund? And then where are you going to find the money then to continue the program for which you borrowed that money? I think that the legislature has passed all these revenue programs, and some of it I support, but they still have a budget deficit. And they've already promised that all this new money is going to be spent for expansion of programs, and yet it looks like they're going to have to use this new money just to shore up existing programs. And so pretty soon, the voters are going to lose faith with policymakers and our leaders. I mean, we have these referendums or initiatives that are approved by the voters. We say it's going to be used for a certain type of program, and then 2 or 3 years later, they rob that program and use the money for something else. So pretty soon people are going to say, wait a second, I can't trust those folks, whether it's local government, state government, or whomever. We're voting for these things, we're approving these things, but then it becomes a bait and switch. And so pretty soon in the future, when we really have a really important program, will the voters be there to support it?
Now, as I shared with you in yesterday's episode of Washington in Focus Daily, I was able to catch up with Governor Locke right after he got off stage and ask him, further press him about some of the budgeting. And he again reiterated that he feels that, the budgeting is really out of control in Olympia right now, and that they're not, even though they're taking in record revenue, they're continuing to, promise things that are well outside what they know is going to be coming in based on economic revenue forecasts that we're getting. I asked him specifically about the income tax as well, and he didn't come out and blatantly say I'm opposed to the income tax, or he did not also endorse the income tax repeal initiative that qualified for the November ballot just this week. But he was very critical of his party, and he is the second Democratic governor to come out and basically blast his own party over how they're budgeting. You may recall it was former Governor Christine Gregoire who recently came out at another Association of Washington business event. It was their spring summit back in early May that former Governor Gregoire said this.
I left office with a budget of 33 billion, and the budget today is 80 billion. I think that's a little bit too much of a growth. And yet, how we find ourselves at the end of every legislative session now is in the hole and projected to be in the hole. I would suggest to you, we don't really have an income problem, we have a spending problem. And we're answering it by stacking one more tax, one more rule, one more regulation. And the one thing that the business community doesn't need is that lack of predictability. That's how businesses grow. That's how they thrive. That's not healthy for our business community at all. As I look, unfortunately, last year at the composition of the Economic Development Committee and the House and the Senate, the one in the House was hard to find. The one in the Senate didn't exist. I asked, when did that happen? Where did the Economic Development Committee go in our state? And they heard and they created one. Why do I think those are so important? To educate regarding the consequences of the taxes. For example, sales tax on services, anti-big business. Who was hurt? Small business. Didn't understand it, didn't know it, didn't have anybody in the caucus who could explain it, nor was there a committee in which they could really begin to see the consequences of that action.
So Gregoire served as Washington's governor for, again, 2 terms, like her predecessor, Governor Locke, from 2005 up to 2013. Now, also in attendance at yesterday's AWB event, which was at the Hilton at SeaTac, was former State Representative Kelly Chambers. She's now part of the Trump administration. She was tapped earlier this year to be a regional administrator for the Small Business Administration, representing both Washington and Idaho. And I asked her specifically about that. We spoke just ahead of the conference beginning on Thursday morning. And she's very concerned seeing a stark contrast in business climate and the approach to business between Washington and Idaho. And so these were some of her comments just ahead of the conference yesterday, specifically addressing concerns about how Olympia is or is not responding.
I oversee Washington and Idaho, so you got 2 states next door to each other that there's really some contrast there with how those states are approaching their business climates. And, I think that lawmakers in Olympia are not getting the message. We do have companies leaving. We do have record amounts of office space available in the city of Seattle. And there are real impacts for that. That means, less jobs. It's a cost shift on the taxes to the residential side. So we really do need lawmakers to see that companies are choosing to leave. But there's a frustration as well because we have businesses that are place bound and they can't leave. They may be, you can't pick up your territory or your zip codes that you own, or, we have one company that has surveyed their employees and they would lose 90% of their employees if they relocated out of Washington. So, companies are in a tough position of wanting lawmakers to understand, hey, we love Washington, we want to stay here, but we need to have an economic environment that allows us to grow. And there's many small businesses that are looking to be that next Amazon, that next Microsoft, and they need policies here in Washington that allow them to do that and don't prevent them from having that growth.
Next week, I intend to share more from that AWB summit as it was very informative. There were real estate groups there, a lot of business executives talking about expanding outside of the state of Washington while still, keeping their headquarters here, intending to fight to the end. Many of them intent on seeing the income tax recently passed and adopted into law, repealed. And again, voters are going to have that option on the November ballot because of the recent certification of the income tax repeal. That's I 645. You'll be seeing that on the November ballot.